Shortly after meeting Kirk Lockwood, Kevin tried to ask him about the Lockwood family's recent downturn. When Kirk initially attributed this to his family's failure to uphold their legacy, Kevin saw through his lies and knew that someone was deliberately trying to target them. Surprised that Kevin had accurately described their family's true situation, Kirk revealed that his father used to be a founding member of the Mavericks until discovering the cruel nature behind their experiments on experts and ordinary people. Being labeled as traitors and suppressed on all fronts since then, Kevin sympathized with the Lockwood family and offered Kirk a chance to reclaim their former glory. The reason why they were able to quickly agree to be allies was because as soon as Kirk Lockwood received Cade's call earlier, he had already sent someone to conduct a background check on Kevin. Given that he had caused quite a stir in Washington as of late, it was not difficult to find out about his recent activities. With the Lockwood family situation getting more and more serious with each passing day, they urgently needed someone powerful to support them. Based on how much he had achieved in Washington in such a short period of time, Kirk strongly believed that Kevin would be able to help them to rise once again. Meanwhile, Kevin had his own thoughts about their partnership. Although the Lockwood family's strength had lessened, they were still one of Washington's most powerful families. As such, Kevin knew that they still had connections in both the military and the government. It was just that they were too heavily suppressed by the Mavericks right now. As long as they were provided with enough resources to rebuild their roots, the Lockwood family situation would greatly improve. In return, Kirk Lockwood would be able to help him win some favor with the higher-ups of the military and the government. Suddenly, Kirk gritted his teeth and said, "Mr. Williams, there's something that I think I should tell you. Perhaps in the future it could be of some help when you face the Mavericks." "What is it?" Kevin wondered with great interest. "Well, in some ways, the Mavericks are similar to many other organizations. They also suffer from an internal conflict." Kirk paused for a moment, then continued. "Right now, the faction's members are divided into two groups, the older generation and the younger generation. The older generation is comprised of senior members and patriarchs of the big families. Given their age, they are desperate for the experiment to produce results as soon as possible in order to increase their lifespans. As such, they are willing to take drastic measures and use shortcuts along the way." Kirk added, "On the other hand, although the younger generation also wants the experiment to succeed, they don't want to rush the process. Instead, they believe that things should carefully be done step by step." Although Kirk did not say how big this conflict between the two generations was, he clearly stated their contrasting beliefs. "You mean to say that the Mavericks are not getting along internally and that this could be used to defeat them?" Kevin frowned slightly and asked a question that he already knew the answer to. "That's right, but no organization has ever been able to take advantage of this fact," Kirk immediately explained. "Although the Mavericks are having problems internally, once something threatens their common interests, the younger generation and the older generation always seem to find a way to set their differences aside and put up a unified front." Kevin understood what he meant. After all, for the Mavericks to reach its current scale, they had to have a solid base that was built on unity. So instead of giving the junior and senior members of the Mavericks a reason to work together, Kevin had to exploit their differences and pit them against one another if he wanted to destroy them. "Understood. Thank you for informing me, Mr. Lockwood." A smile appeared on Kevin's face again as he added, "One more thing. The consortium that I have set up will be having a formal lunch event in 2 days. I hope that your family will come to support me then." "Mr. Williams, don't worry. When the time comes, I will definitely be there in person," Kirk reassured with a boisterous laugh. After that, Kevin didn't say anything else and left the Lockwood family's mansion with Tyler Dawn. When they returned to his mansion at Swan Lake, he first called Scott Whitney and told him about what he and Kirk Lockwood had discussed. As expected, Scott reminded him to take everything with a grain of salt. Over the next 2 days, Kevin refined 2 pills for his parents and stayed at home to spend some quality time with them. On the 3rd day, Kevin left Swan Lake early in the morning. The consortium's launch event was held at a historical building in downtown D.C. The atmosphere was lively, and those who were invited were all big shots in the business world. Just then, a rare Pagani Roadster arrived at the scene, instantly attracting the attention of many people. After stepping out of the car, Kevin stood at the entrance to welcome all of the incoming guests. "Congratulations, Mr. Williams." George Eubanks greeted him with a huge smile on his face as he walked over with his grandson Kurt, who was carrying gifts in his hands. He had seen a few familiar faces just now, and they were all owners and executives of Washington's top companies. Although George did not know how Kevin managed to convince all of them to join, he knew that with the consortium's establishment, many business synergies could be shared between its members, opening up opportunities for everyone. As such, the future prospects of the Eubanks family definitely looked promising. "Thank you for coming today, Mr. Eubanks," Kevin replied to George, but his eyes were fixed on Kurt. At that moment, Kurt was also staring at Kevin with mixed feelings. Not long ago, Kurt Eubanks and Carson Murphy tried to bully Kevin, who had just arrived in Washington, but in the end they were humiliated and almost lost their lives. On top of that, George Eubanks had scolded him for days following that incident. Back then, Kurt was still unconvinced about Kevin, but since then, Kevin had caused one storm after another in Washington, and now he was a powerful force that even his grandfather had to treat with utmost respect. At the same time, Kurt had clearly realized the huge gap between himself and Kevin. Even the reputation of his family could not make up for it. Knowing that the Eubanks family would definitely not be a match for Kevin at any point in the foreseeable future, Kurt did not dare to offend him now. After all, he did not want the Eubanks family to end up like the Kessler family. "Mr. Williams, I apologize for my rude behavior in the past. I hope you can forgive me," Kurt uttered sincerely. "It's fine. It was just a misunderstanding, and I'm sure you've learned your lesson since then," Kevin reassured him with a smile. As his voice fell, it seemed that the hostility between the two had disappeared, causing George Eubanks to let out a huge sigh of relief. Although the Eubanks family supported Kevin, George had previously been worried that the tension between the two of them would cause Kevin to hold some prejudice against them in the future. Moreover, with Kyle Thompson also being Kevin's student, the gap between the Thompson and Eubanks family would only grow to a greater degree over time. While George could still oversee things and manage the situation now, what would happen to his family when he was no longer around? Fortunately, now that Kevin had buried the hatchet with his grandson, he no longer had to worry about this anymore. Just then, Herman Thompson had also arrived, bringing Kyle along with him. Upon seeing Kevin, Herman immediately walked over and greeted Kevin, saying, "Congratulations, Mr. Williams." "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," Kevin replied politely. However, his eyes flashed with surprise. At the moment, Kyle was not the only one who stood beside Herman Thompson, as Donald Murphy also accompanied him. Didn't he and Michael Rafferty make their stance clear the other day? Did he suddenly have a change of heart? "What brings you here, Mr. Murphy?" Kevin asked with a puzzled look on his face. "Although I didn't choose to follow you, today is your big day. Is there anything wrong with me coming here to congratulate you?" Donald replied with a fake smile. Hearing this, Herman Thompson and George Eubanks slightly frowned. There was no need for Donald to be so obvious. "You're right. Besides, we don't have a conflict with each other." Kevin nodded while forcing a smile. Just as Kevin was about to say something else, Tyler Dawn hurriedly walked over looking troubled. "What's the matter?" Kevin asked nervously. Tyler looked at Herman Thompson and the others, then shook his head slightly before whispering something in Kevin's ear. "What's wrong, Mr. Williams?" George asked. He could sense that something was off. As he and the others looked around, someone was noticeably absent. Terry Watford was missing, and that he was one of Kevin's most trusted allies and business partners meant that his absence was not something that happened by chance, but was the work of an evil enemy. At the launch of Kevin's new business consortium, George Eubanks arrived with his grandson Kurt, who apologized to Kevin for how he had treated him in the past. After Kevin accepted his apology, George heaved a sigh of relief. But when Herman Thompson arrived with his own grandson, Kyle, they were accompanied by Donald Murphy, which surprised Kevin since he and Michael Rafferty had both made it clear that they would not be joining the consortium. Donald forced a smile and told Kevin that he still wanted to be there to congratulate him on his momentous occasion. Just then, Tyler Dawn rushed over to Kevin and informed him that Terry Watford was mysteriously missing. It wasn't just George Eubanks and the other recent arrivals who hadn't seen him yet, but even Kevin, Tyler, and some of the others who had come early in the morning hadn't seen him either. Kevin had only received a text message at around 8 o'clock saying that he had encountered a traffic jam and might be a few minutes late. However, up until now, 2 hours had passed, and there was still no news about Terry Watford.
"Don't worry, Kevin. No matter what, Terry is a person with a great status and reputation. He also has a group of loyal bodyguards protecting him. There won't be any big problems in Washington, D.C.,
George Eubanks said, trying to relieve the tension.
"That's right. Terry is the CEO of the Orion Group. No one would dare to touch him."
Herman Thompson agreed with him. Although he heard what the two of them said, Kevin still had a bad feeling about the situation. Recently, Washington, D.C. had been far too quiet. The Mavericks did not seek revenge on him. Even the Robbins family, whose home had been taken away by him, did not show any signs of movement. The overly quiet environment gave Kevin a feeling of sitting on pins and needles. However, the consortium needed him to take charge to prevent any incidents from happening. Troy Evans and the others had to stay at Swan Lake to protect his parents' safety, so there was really no extra manpower to allocate. Time passed and more guests arrived. It was almost midnight, but there was still no news from Terry Watford. "Is there still no one answering the phone?" Kevin asked. His face was completely gloomy.
"No."
Tyler Dawn's heart was filled with worry.
"Why don't we wait just a little longer? Maybe he has something urgent to attend to and has been delayed."
Herman Thompson frowned and suggested.
"No way. He is a man with a firm sense of time. No matter how urgent the situation is, he wouldn't neglect to give us any news."
Tyler Dawn hesitated for a moment and then said,
"Something must have happened to him."
"Send a few more people," Kevin started to say. But before Kevin could finish, a black shadow suddenly fell from the sky and crashed to the ground.
"What's going on?"
someone said in alarm.
"What the hell? It seems like a person has fallen from the sky,"
said another.
"Why does this person look so familiar?"
a third person said. The surrounding people looked at the black shadow descending from the sky and started to point at it.
"It's Terry!"
Tyler Dawn shouted as he was the first to react and quickly walked forward. Kevin and the others quickly returned to their senses and followed him. Between them, Terry Watford, who was lying on the ground, had fallen unconscious. His face was covered with bruises and blood, and his limbs were motionless and powerless.
"Terry, can you hear me? Are you okay?"
Tyler said as he anxiously checked his condition and spoke with a trembling voice. Herman Thompson and the others surrounded Terry Watford's motionless body. Only Donald Murphy remained where he was, looking at them with a strange expression. Kevin raised his head and looked at the sky. In the darkness, he saw a figure in the window on the 5th floor looking at them with a sneer on his face. "Stop! Hey, you!" Kevin yelled at him sternly. But before he could even finish his sentence, Kevin stomped on the ground and shook the floor with his foot. He jumped up and started climbing the fire escape all the way to the 5th floor. However, when he arrived at the window after no more than 30 seconds, the man had already reached the door. He extended his left hand and gave him the middle finger.
"You must have a death wish,"
Kevin shouted, burning with anger. He threw himself at the door. But before the man even reached the door, the dense spiritual energy had already enveloped his entire body. When Kevin moved, he created what seemed to be a strong hurricane. It blew all of the things in the room in every direction.
"Uh-oh,"
the man mumbled as his eyes flashed with shock, and he hurriedly tried to close the door behind him. But before he could make a move, a violent force swept through the room, and the door was immediately smashed into pieces. It even caused the man to fly backward and violently slam into the wall. The man shook his head a few times and tried to wake himself up, but before he could even get up, Kevin had already arrived in front of him. He stepped on the man's chest with such force that he immediately broke 4 of his ribs. The intense pain made the man cry out, "You hurt my people and you still want to try to run from me? You have a lot of nerve." Kevin looked down at him from above with a cold expression on his face. He questioned him with anger burning in his heart. "You," the man started to say, wincing in pain as he stared at Kevin with a face full of shock. "I'll give you a chance now. Tell me who you are. Who told you to do this? I might be able to let you die a quick death. Otherwise, I'll make you regret ever coming into this world." Kevin's tone was extremely angry as he roared at the man. You want me to talk to you? Keep dreaming." The man endured the pain and spat at Kevin with disdain. "I didn't know you were such a tough guy." "Very well. I guess it's your funeral." Kevin pulled the man up from the ground and dragged him to another windowless room. He kicked the door open and threw him inside. After that, he closed the door and locked it behind him. Kevin's rage was like nothing he had ever experienced before. Not only did Terry Watford get attacked, but someone actually took such bold action on a day like today. How big of an impact would this have after happening in front of so many people? There was no need to ask. Kevin knew that someone would definitely say it. The consortium did not have any sort of protection for their members' lives, and there was also a huge threat bearing down on them from the outside. Given such an atmosphere, there was naturally going to be some apprehension. Therefore, Kevin had to dig out all of the people being hidden in the shadows by this person in front of him and make them pay. He wanted to let everyone know that this was the only outcome that could come from messing with him. He wanted to let every uncertain heart, all those who were still swaying left and right, know that if they dared to provoke Kevin, they would surely die. These thoughts quickly flashed through his mind. Kevin looked at the man curled up on the ground and said coldly, "You still have a chance to tell me your name. Don't force my hand." "If you have the guts, then just do it. Get it over with. If I say anything, I'm finished anyway," the man replied loudly. "It doesn't have to be this way." A cold look flashed across Kevin's eyes. In the next second, he walked up to the man. Since he had given him an opportunity, he could not be blamed for what happened next. Kevin raised his hand as fast as lightning. He bent his right hand into a claw and grabbed the man's palm. A few loud cracking sounds were heard. The man's eyes widened. His pale face quickly turned red. He gritted his teeth and bit his lips, not letting himself make a sound. However, his lips had been bitten right open and blood flowed out like a fountain. "Let me see how much pain you can endure." As Kevin spoke, his foot had already landed on the ground, forcefully crushing one of the man's ankles. Intense pain swept across his entire body once again. The man's eyes widened and he could not help but let out a miserable scream. "Aren't you a tough guy? Then can you hold on for a bit longer?" Kevin's tone was cold, almost as if he had spat out these words. His foot kept grinding down on the man's ankle. This forceful action caused the pain to become unbearable. But would it be enough to force this man to tell Kevin what was behind the attack on Terry Watford and on Kevin's new business consortium? Kevin was not about to let this man ruin everything that he had worked for. After a beaten and bruised Terry Watford was dropped into the middle of Kevin's business consortium's gala party, Kevin spotted a mysterious stranger watching the chaos from afar. Kevin caught and beat the man trying to find out who was behind the attack on Terry and on Kevin's latest organization. No one could truly endure the torment of the pain that Kevin was able to inflict, not even those who had gone through training for such battles since they were young. When Kevin repeatedly crushed his ankle and made his way up the man's leg, the man's entire face had already twisted, but he gritted his teeth tightly and did his best to endure. His lips had already started to bleed. and he was trying to suppress himself from making a sound by gritting his teeth even tighter. "The pain will only get worse," Kevin said in a serious tone. Then Kevin bent down and reached out his left hand. He grabbed the man's right knee and twisted it. A cracking sound was heard echoing throughout the room. The pain was 100 times stronger than before as it swept across his entire body. The man started to tremble violently. His body couldn't help but flop on the ground. He clenched his fist tightly, and his nails had long since pierced right through his skin. Blood flowed through the gaps of his fingers and dripped onto the ground. "A good show is coming," Kevin sneered. He stretched out his index and middle fingers and quickly pressed down on the man's right leg. The man could no longer bear the inhuman pain and let out a painful wail. "What are you screaming for? Aren't you a tough guy? The show has just begun," Kevin said with a sneer on his face. "Kill me! Please, just kill me!" the man said as he twitched in pain. "Kill you? Is there such a simple thing in this world? If you don't speak up now, I will definitely make sure you don't die quickly today. I'll let you experience the taste of hell ahead of time, though." Kevin didn't give up and struck the man's thigh hard. With a dull thud, the man straightened out. He raised his head high and his eyeballs seemed to be about to pop out of their sockets. By this point, the man's right leg had been crippled by Kevin. Every inch of the bones in his leg had been shattered. There would never be a chance for him to walk normally again in this lifetime. Even if he consumed every medicinal pill Kevin was capable of refining, it would still be impossible to cure him completely. The man had just fainted, but Kevin immediately woke him up again. "Don't do it, I beg you. I'll tell you everything you want to know." The man looked at Kevin with fear in his eyes as if he had lost all of his energy. He lay on the ground in a dispirited manner. He had used up all of his strength to endure the pain that Kevin had inflicted on him. At this moment, in his eyes, Kevin was like a devil who had crawled out from the depths of hell. "Why didn't you just speak up earlier?" Kevin snorted in disdain. "Answer me honestly. What's your name? Who sent you?" "My name is Alex Dobbins. I'm from the secluded valley." The man lowered his eyes and replied. He no longer had the courage to even look at Kevin. The secluded valley? Kevin's pupils contracted and he gasped slightly. At the same time, Kevin's eyes lit up. He had been looking for the secluded valley for a long time. "Who are you working with this time? Is it the Herbalist Society or the Robbins family?" Kevin asked again. "I don't know for sure. I only received the mission today, and Mr. Watford wasn't even injured by me. When those people handed him over to me, he was already seriously injured, I swear to you," Alex Dobbins said without hiding anything. "Who are those people?" Kevin asked. He knew that there were strict rules in the secluded valley. Every mission had different people who completed each part of the mission. Other than the person in charge of the entire operation, no one would know the whole plan. "That group of people is a part of a small team. Ever since the branch in Washington, D.C. was broken up, the headquarters has set up 5 operation teams in Washington," Alex said, still breathing heavily. "Where did you meet? Are any of your friends among the guests who came today?" Kevin narrowed his eyes and asked. "There's one, but I don't know his exact identity. The mission I received was to leave Mr. Watford on the 5th floor," Alex said as he choked. As a professional killer, he was unable to withstand the torture after having his hand crushed by Kevin. It undoubtedly caused a great deal of damage to his self-esteem. "Why did you choose to stay on the 5th floor? You could have easily thrown him down from a higher floor, or rather, just killed him with a gun," Kevin said suspiciously. "Because Mr. Watford is the head of the Orion Group, the people in charge noticed him a long time ago. If we kill him recklessly, the secluded valley would be punished by the government, and it could be considered a terrorist attack," he replied. The more Alex Dobbins spoke, the weaker his tone became. "I didn't think that the secluded valley still cared about abiding by the law," Kevin said, his face showing some difference. The last question I have for you is this. Do you know the exact location of the 5 teams?
Yes,
Alex admitted. Thank you very much for your cooperation, but since you hurt my people, I can definitely not let you continue to live in this world. As Kevin spoke, he reached out his hand and grabbed Alex Dobbins' neck. His expression instantly froze on his face. He covered his own neck with both hands and then stopped moving. At the entrance, a large group of big shots who were rarely seen gathered off to the side and whispered to each other.
What happened to Mr. Watford? I really can't understand who had the guts to attack him, someone said.
In this person's opinion, it couldn't possibly be Terry Watford's fault. He was usually humble and polite, and he took care of people who worked for him. Many people felt it would be impossible for someone like him to even have enemies.
Can't you just admit that it was Mr. Williams' fault? Is there a need to hide like this? Who else could possibly be to blame? Anyway, I don't want to join anymore,
another person replied. That's right. If even Terry Watford can suffer a fate like this, aren't we just waiting to be slaughtered? No matter what you think, I have decided to quit. As for the medicinal pills, I have to be alive to be able to enjoy them. A few people walked up to Tyler Dawn and made their concerns known.
I understand your concerns. Everyone has their own ambition, so I won't force you one way or the other. Please do as you wish,
Tyler Dawn said nervously as he looked at Terry, who was still lying on the ground surrounded by people. The few of them left quickly as if they had been granted amnesty. It seemed that they did not want to stay there any longer than they had to. How was Mr. Watford's condition? Kevin suddenly appeared beside Tyler Dawn and asked.
The situation doesn't look good. The ambulance is on the way,
Tyler Dawn said. Then he seemed to have thought of something. He turned around and asked,
Mr. Williams, have you caught them? Who did this?
He's a nobody. He's still up on the 5th floor. Find someone to dispose of the body later, Kevin said as he kept looking around, eager to find the accomplice that Alex Dobbins had mentioned.
Mr. Williams, you are the most talented herbalist here. Can you refine some kind of pill to cure Mr. Watford?
Donald Murphy, who approached the two of them, asked. As long as he is still breathing, I can think of a way to save him, but he has to wake up and consume the medicinal pill completely. If he is unconscious, there's not much I can do to help him, Kevin said. After all, he had the secret book in his hands. As long as the materials were available and in place with his current power base, he could almost mass-produce life and death potions. Hearing this, Tyler Dawn and the others relaxed a little, but no one noticed that Donald Murphy was frowning. In his opinion, it seemed that it was not a good thing for Terry Watford to be able to survive and make a complete recovery. After having people search around very carefully, they still did not find any suspicious people, which made Kevin a little disappointed. At that moment, a few people came in front of Kevin, pushing each other out of the way, but no one dared to step forward and speak first. What do you want? Kevin frowned slightly. He had already guessed their intentions.
Mr. Williams, to be honest, we are just ordinary businessmen. We are not cut out for this. As for the pills promised by the consortium, I'm afraid that we won't have the fortune of accepting them.
One of the middle-aged men, who was about 50 years old, said awkwardly. You have your own choices to make, so I won't blame you. But there's one thing I need you to remember clearly. You can leave the consortium as you wish today, but if you want to join again in the future, it'll be even more difficult for you. I can promise you that at the time you'll regret what you did today, and I believe you'll also regret it for the rest of your lives, Kevin said decisively as his voice grew louder. He wanted everyone to hear clearly that their decision to depart today was definitely not a good thing. Hearing his words, the few people standing in front of Kevin showed a strong sense of worry.
All right, I completely understand, sir,
the man said with a nod. After saying this, the middle-aged man left with the other few people. Immediately after, another dozen people followed them and left. For a moment, there were less than 15 people still left in front of Kevin. Tyler Dawn's gaze swept over these people one by one. A few traces of calm flashed across his face, because these dozen or so people were among his and Terry Watford's most powerful business associates over the past several years. Being able to stay after facing such a terrifying thing proved that they were truly to be trusted. Before Kevin could do anything to pacify the remaining people, the sound of police sirens rang out, and 5 or 6 police officers quickly walked forward. Following them, dozens of armed personnel arrived. They immediately sealed up the area and prevented anyone from entering. Anyone who could stand here was clearly a big shot in the business world. A slight stomp of their foot could cause a financial shockwave through several industries. The leader was a valiant female police officer. She brought her men behind her and walked quickly to the door. She looked around at everyone. "Mr. Dawn, I am Officer Alexandra Wentworth. I have been specially ordered to protect your safety," the officer said with a serious face.
"You're a little late. The attacker has already been killed. He's up on the 5th floor.
Before Officer Wentworth could say anything, Tyler Dawn added,
"Here is the man who took care of him."
After saying that, Tyler Dawn introduced Kevin to Officer Wentworth. "Hello, sir. If possible, I would like to ask you to come back with us and make a complete statement," Officer Wentworth said. The status and identity of an expert like Kevin were too sensitive. Even the police were not allowed to oversee cases like this most of the time. "I'm sorry, I have urgent matters to attend to. Also, regarding the attack on Mr. Watford, I can assure you that it is not something that the police can manage." Kevin did not give too much of an explanation. He took out the small booklet that Stanley Cooper had given him. Looking at the contents of the small book, the look on Officer Wentworth's face changed instantly. She immediately realized that Kevin was someone who deserved to be treated with utmost respect. "The Reaper Squad has taken over this matter. You only need to be responsible for bringing Mr. Watford to the hospital safely. As for the rest of the people here, I will arrange for them myself." As Kevin spoke, he took out his phone and dialed Stanley Cooper's number. Although Officer Wentworth was somewhat unwilling, she had to accept Kevin's orders as soon as he mentioned the Reaper Squad. Meanwhile, in Chicago, the streets were very crowded. The Chicago Police Department had no choice but to send out a large number of police officers to maintain order. Even so, the situation on the streets was still chaos. The reason for this was very simple. Everyone knew that the Williams Company was holding a huge singing competition today. Among them were some of the most popular female pop stars in the world. When the news got out, fans flocked to see them. "How is the situation now?" Lily, who was sitting in the VIP seats, asked with a slight frown.
"Don't worry, ma'am. There are a lot of fans. The standing room that we have prepared is not even enough to accommodate them."
A Williams media event was about to begin, and everyone knew that such a gathering would showcase the greatest talent to be found in the singing world. Kevin informed the D.C. police officer, Alexandra Wentworth, who had arrived to oversee the investigation of Terry Watford's attack, that the Reaper Squad had been called, and she stepped back as the Reaper Squad was more powerful. In Chicago, Williams Media had excited everyone by opening a singing competition that would feature many great talents. Although it was an enormous moment, this was only the tip of the iceberg for the Williams Company's plans for the entertainment industry. "Pay close attention to the safety of all the people present. Don't let any issues come up," Lily could not help but remind them. She attached great importance to today's event. It was not as simple as letting the 3 stars sing and show their faces for everyone to see. More important than anything else, she wanted the event to reflect well on the Williams Company. On the top floor of a building not far from the closed-off street where the competition was taking place, Dalton Steele and Ethan Williams stood side by side. The two of them used high-powered binoculars in their hands to observe every moment down the street.
"It seems like I have underestimated the abilities of the Williams Company. Those 3 singers actually have quite a few fans, don't they?"
Ethan Williams complained.
"What are you so worried about? Didn't Andre Hernandez already make the arrangements? The more people there are, the more the Williams Company will be utterly embarrassed," Dalton Steele said without a bit of worry.
"You're right. Now I really want to see the Williams Company make a fool of themselves."
Ethan Williams' face was full of a sinister smile. He swirled the red wine glass in his hand as if he couldn't wait to gloat. At that time, in the Williams Company's office, Emo Squire was writing an email when Sandra Wilson suddenly pushed open the door and came into the room. "Mr. Squire, someone just sent a USB drive over saying it's for you," Sandra said as she placed a black USB drive on the desk in front of him.
"A USB drive? I didn't ask anyone to send anything over,"
Emo Squire said in puzzlement. "You didn't? The man also said that there's something very important about you on the drive and that you must watch it as soon as possible," Sandra replied. Emo Squire frowned slightly. He held the USB drive in his hand and observed it carefully. He did not find anything wrong with it. After thinking about it carefully, Emo Squire inserted the USB drive into the computer. Immediately, a video popped up on his screen. In the beginning, Emo assumed it was some kind of a prank. However, the video suddenly changed his mind. Dalton Steele appeared behind a young man in a private room. Andre Hernandez was also there. However, Emo Squire knew the young man very well. He was Ethan Williams, the son of Thomas Williams from New York City. Emo didn't know what the three of them were talking about, but in the end, Andre Hernandez had a bright smile on his face. Looking at the video, Emo's facial expression became concerned. He quickly recalled the incident where Enzo Forbes was killed. Suddenly, Emo stood up from his chair and looked at Sandra Wilson. Both of them had a look of alarm on their faces. Emo said, "This is not good. Something bad is about to happen." The two of them then quickly ran out of the office and went straight to the parking lot. Along the way, Sandra called Lily. At the competition, Lily was directing the people around her to check on one thing or another to make sure that everything went as smoothly as possible. Andre Hernandez was just about to walk over and say something when he suddenly saw Lily's vibrating phone on the side table to her left. Looking at Sandra Wilson's incoming call, Andre Hernandez's expression changed. Calling at this time could only mean one thing. Something had changed and his plot was being undermined. Taking a deep breath, Andre Hernandez avoided everyone's eyes and secretly put Lily's phone into his pocket, while she was distracted by a conversation with someone to her right. "Ma'am, I have a bit of a migraine. I'm going to find a place to lie down, if that's okay," Andre said when Lily turned back to him. "Yes, of course. You should go and rest. If there are any problems, I will send someone to find you," Lily said with concern for Andre. She had a very high opinion of Andre Hernandez. After the incident with Enzo Forbes, it was all because of him that this event could still be carried out successfully. Lily had already made up her mind. After they got through this event, she would definitely give Andre Hernandez a promotion and a hefty raise. With his ability, it was a waste for him to be just the deputy director of the Research and Development Department. Anyway, the event had already begun. She just needed to sit back and watch like everyone else now. Andre Hernandez thanked her and disappeared. However, the smile on his face immediately left when he turned around a corner. He glanced at Lily out of the corner of his eye as he quickly exited the VIP area. The event started with some opening acts. They were not very famous. But when the three big stars appeared on the stage, the excitement reached its peak. Immediately, all kinds of flattering words were shouted at them as the crowd went wild. The fans showered them with cheers and shouts.
"I really didn't know that they were so popular."
A look of surprise flashed across Gilbert Rhodes's face as he watched. "I know. It's really incredible," Adriana Wright said as she teared up. It had not been easy for them during this period of time. Outsiders could not understand the pain they had been enduring. Adriana Wright, Gilbert Rhodes, and the others looked fine on the surface. But in fact, with Dalton Steele's betrayal and his rise recently, they had been living a life of worry every day. Even when they slept at night, there were dozens of bodyguards watching over them, although they knew that they would not be of any practical use if Dalton truly wanted to do something to harm them. But their real goal was to buy themselves enough time to call Kevin before all the bodyguards fell and let him know the situation in Chicago. What worried them the most was that they could not let Kevin down. He had placed very high expectations on them. Moreover, they were committed to truly risking their lives if necessary. The wealth that Adriana Wright and the others had right now was enough for them to do nothing for the rest of their lives and live freely. At that moment, Adriana was watching the three big stars on the stage as they prepared to begin singing. The entire venue was overcome with the deafening roar of the crowd as the atmosphere reached its peak. No one noticed that amongst the crowd, a man wearing a dark cap slowly took out a remote control in his hand. At that moment, under the protection of a dozen police officers, Emo Squire and Sandra Wilson stepped out from the crowd and ran toward Lily, Gilbert, and Adriana. Lily could see Emo Squire trying to tell her something, but she couldn't understand him. "What is he trying to say?" Lily asked the person beside her.
"He's too far. I can't hear clearly,"
a staff member answered awkwardly. Emo Squire was still trying his best to shout across the crowd. "There's no way, Emo. It's too noisy here. They can't hear us," Sandra said.
"I have an idea." Emo Squire started to rush towards the stage.
At the same time, the man in the crowd saw that the timing was not right and immediately pressed the remote control in his hand. Just as the trio began to sing, they heard a recording of their own voices begin to play over the speakers. Instantly, the entire venue broke out in song along with them.
"This is not good,"
Emo Squire said. It only took a few moments for the crowd to realize that the trio was not actually singing.
"What the hell? They're clearly lip-syncing," someone shouted. "Is this what we paid all this money for? How could the Williams Company do this?" another person said.
Lily instantly stood up from her chair. Her eyes widened to the extreme as she looked at what was happening in front of her. She was stunned. All kinds of cries and curses immediately rang out, making the scene even more chaotic. On the top floor of the hotel not far away, Ethan Williams watched as the people in the crowd booed loudly, and the smile on his face became brighter and brighter. This was exactly what he wanted to see.
"What a shame. It's a pity that the Williams Company would do such a thing."
Ethan Williams swirled the red wine in his hand and said with a smile. Dalton Steele coldly glanced at him with an expressionless face. Ethan returned to his chair and sat down elegantly.
"What should we do next? With such an embarrassing event happening to the Williams Company, surely their reputation will be greatly reduced. All you need to do is add some more wood to the fire. You will definitely be able to defeat them."
As soon as he finished speaking, Dalton Steele acted as if he did not hear Ethan Williams' words.
"I'm talking to you. Did you hear me?"
Ethan asked in a daze.
"Are you an idiot?"
Dalton said as he glared at Ethan.
"What did you just say?"
Ethan asked as his face stiffened.
"With such a big incident happening, the Williams Company will definitely join forces with the police to investigate. They'll also bring in the top PR firms in the country. The singers themselves will deny any wrongdoing too. At this critical juncture, almost everyone in Chicago knows that we are the only ones who would dare to attack the Williams Company. Besides, there are cameras everywhere. It will only be a matter of time before everyone turns their attention to us and figures everything out."
Dalton had analyzed the situation quickly and coldly.
"If the police really intervene, how long do you think Andre Hernandez can hold on if he is caught? Do you really think he won't confess? Then all of the embarrassment will land on you, not the Williams Company," Dalton added.
Hearing this, Ethan gradually fell into silence.
"According to what you've just said, would everything we did be in vain?"
Ethan lowered his head and said,
"You can't say that. Strictly speaking, it's not all in vain. After such a major incident, the Williams Company will surely be distracted for quite a while. They'll figure it all out, I'm sure, but it will take considerable manpower. And while they're dealing with this matter, it will buy us enough time to devour the rest of Chicago."
Dalton analyzed the situation with a serious expression. If Kevin heard this, he would definitely be shocked. It turned out that Dalton Steele didn't only know how to fight fiercely, now he had actually become so smooth and calculating, and it could even be said that he was well versed in the art of business. Meanwhile, the remaining dozen or so people sat down around a table. Similarly, their eyes were filled with worry. I'm very happy that after the incident with Mr. Watford, everyone still felt it was worth the risk to stay. I'm sincerely grateful for this, Kevin said with a serious expression on his face.
Mr. Williams, you don't have to be so grateful. It's entirely thanks to Mr. Dawn and Mr. Watford that I've been able to have what I have today. I am a person who knows how to repay favors. They need me now. It's my duty to come and help, a man said with great confidence. Immediately, someone else stood up and said, Mr. Williams, I just want to ask you a question. You said before that Mr. Watford could be saved. Do you really have a way to save him? As long as you can save him, I would be willing to do anything to help him. I only have one request. Can you find the real culprit behind this? This was Terry Watford's terrifying network. Sometimes when you take care of others, people might not necessarily be able to remember it. But those who do remember it are often willing to risk their lives to repay it. Thank you, everyone, Kevin said, trying to speak over the clamor. I just want to say that Mr. Watford will definitely be taken care of. He is in very good hands. I can assure you that I will find his attacker and get revenge. The Williams Media concert ended in chaos when Ethan's scheme to make it seem like the singers were lip-syncing was set into motion. Dalton, though, told Ethan the plot would backfire on him, even though there would be enough time for Dalton to continue his power grab as Williams Media regrouped. Meanwhile, Kevin had thanked those who stayed in his consortium while vowing to get revenge on Terry Watford's attackers. No one could clearly understand how intense the fury in Kevin's heart was right now, but looking at Kevin's current performance, the dozen or so people who stayed behind also relaxed a little. They were not afraid that Kevin would not have the temper to call the police, but they were afraid that he would not have the courage to settle the matter if he got into trouble and was bullied by others. Also, let me tell everyone something else. All of you who stayed behind will be the core members of the consortium. No matter what happens in the future, your treatment will always be higher than any others who join, regardless of their status. I can promise you here that I will provide you with a 5th grade pill every month from now on, Kevin said with a smile on his face. However, as soon as he finished speaking, everyone wondered, what was a 5th grade pill capable of? The list of pills put out by the Herbalist Society clearly stated that not only were 5th grade pills worth at the very least tens of thousands of dollars, but they were also exceedingly rare and difficult to refine. Now, Kevin actually said that he would give them one such pill every single month. Apart from the pills, I can make a decision for Mr. Dawn and Mr. Watford. I promise you that from today onward, we will share all of the resources of the consortium. As long as your plans and ideas do not involve breaking the law in any way, and if you do not harm the safety and interests of any ordinary people, you have our full support, Kevin declared. These words were even more attractive than the pills they had just been promised. For a moment, a few of the dozen people gathered around couldn't help but stand up in surprise. After all, they were just businessmen and ordinary people. In their bones, the anticipation of being able to do business with the full support and backing of these 3 powerhouses far exceeded their yearning for medicinal pills. The KWTD Corporation and the Orion Group were 2 of the pillars of the entire country. If they could work with the 2 of them, they were sure to rise rapidly. As for how exactly you want to work with them, you can discuss it with Mr. Dawn. That's all I have to say for now. I'll leave the rest to you. Kevin stood up again and gave Tyler Dawn a look before leaving the meeting room. Before he walked out of the meeting room, Kevin heard voices coming from behind him. It was obvious that someone could not hold it in and wanted to tell Tyler what they were thinking.
Kevin had already expected this kind of situation. After all, most of his energy was no longer in the business world. He just had to let Tyler handle these things at this point. When he returned to the first floor and saw Donald Murphy standing at the door, Kevin was a little surprised. "Mr. Murphy, why are you still here?" Kevin asked.
"What's wrong? Can't I be here? Or do you want to chase me away?"
Donald Murphy placed his hands behind his back and asked with a slightly raised brow. Kevin noted the joking tone in Donald Murphy's voice. "Surely you must be joking. If you want to stay in the consortium, just say so," Kevin said with a smile on his face. Donald Murphy did not reply immediately. He just gave Kevin a deep look.
"Mr. Watford safely made it to the hospital. Kevin, let this old man give you a few words of advice. The Secluded Valley is not an organization you can mess with. You had better not provoke them too much,"
Donald Murphy advised. Kevin was stunned when he heard that. He was surprised this matter is why Donald Murphy remained behind. "Mr. Murphy, you should know that the Secluded Valley and I have been in an unresolved situation for a long time. And now they actually had the audacity to attack Terry. How could I let them get away with this?" Kevin replied angrily. He added, "Although I can't just go to the headquarters of the Secluded Valley yet, I will root them out one day. I promise you that." Looking at Kevin, who was clearly full of hostility, Donald Murphy stared into his eyes with a searching expression for a long time. Then he let out a sigh. Without saying anything more, Donald shook his head and left. Looking at Donald's back as he walked away, Kevin frowned. The Murphy family did not choose to support him. According to common sense, it did not matter how Donald Murphy felt about the Mavericks, the Robbins family, or anyone else. It was also telling that Michael Rafferty, who also chose not to support him, did not even show his face from the beginning to the end. Especially when it came to Terry Watford's matter, Donald Murphy seemed far too calm. His calmness was even a little abnormal. However, Kevin couldn't tell exactly what was wrong. The most important thing was that he didn't have any evidence to prove that Donald Murphy had done anything. Kevin left the consortium and went straight to the hospital. No matter what, Terry still needed him. Whether it was his personal relationship with him or the overall situation of their alliance, Kevin had to help. On the way to the hospital, Kevin sent a message to Stanley Cooper, asking him to take some people to Washington. Meanwhile, at the Williams Company headquarters in Chicago, Lily sat still in a chair. Her hands were pulling at her thick hair, and she buried her head in deep thought. Adriana Wright and Gilbert Rhodes kept pacing back and forth in front of her. The scene had been overwhelming for everyone. Although Emo Squire pulled the three singers down from the stage before they were completely overcome with embarrassment, the damage had been done. It was clear that because of this incident, the Williams Company would be all over the headlines for days or even weeks to come. People all over social media were already saying that the Williams Company was really an embarrassment. In the eyes of onlookers, they could not even pull off a concert without looking like fakers. Because of all of this, Rachel and Sandra had been very busy trying to deal with the backlash. The police had been called to stop the reporters and fans outside the building from starting a riot. The worst of it was that Emo Squire had been trampled by angry fans as he was trying to make his way to the stage, and he was currently in critical condition. Sandra appeared in front of Lily, and she immediately asked for an update on his condition. The others also gathered around. Her gaze swept over Lily and the others one by one. She lightly sighed and said, "It's not good. The doctors told me that it is best to plan for the worst-case scenario." Hearing that, Gilbert Rhodes immediately used his hand to cover his mouth and nose, not letting himself cry out loud. "How could this be? Emo is an expert. Although he suffered some injuries, it can't possibly be that serious." Adriana Wright's face was also filled with worry as she spoke. "Unfortunately, his power base is not that high. The damage wasn't just on the surface, but also to several of his internal organs. Sandra patiently analyzed the situation for everyone.
Is it really hopeless?
Gilbert Rhodes asked in a daze. They are going to try their best, but they also asked us to prepare for the worst. According to Emo's condition, things could take a turn at any moment. Sandra's eyes were sad, and she sighed. Gilbert Rhodes seemed to have lost all of his energy. His face turned white, and he took a few steps back while gasping for air and stumbling. He leaned against the wall and slowly slid to the ground. "Gilbert!" Adriana cried out as she quickly ran over and tried to help him up.
"What can we do? He's going to die!"
Gilbert cried out as he hugged Adriana tightly and buried his head in her chest. Adriana did not know how to comfort Gilbert and only used her strength to hug him back. She looked at Lily beside her and opened her mouth but did not say anything. Lily was expressionless as she stood rooted to the spot and her delicate body began to tremble. Meanwhile, outside the hospital in Washington, when Kevin rushed to the operating room, he saw a group of high-ranking officials from the Orion Group gathered at the door. Marcus Watford sat in the chair and held his face tightly with both hands.
"Who are you? They're performing surgery inside. No one is allowed here."
A man suddenly stood up and reprimanded Kevin with a cold face. Before Kevin could explain, a man slapped the top of the man's head.
"Hey, why did you hit me?"
The man covered his head and asked in confusion.
"Who the hell are you talking to? This is the second largest shareholder of our company, Mr. Williams. Get out of my sight,"
the man said as he turned his head and squeezed out a smile as he looked at Kevin. He said respectfully to Kevin,
"Mr. Williams, don't mind him. This kid just got here and doesn't know what's good for him. Please forgive him."
"I don't mind. I'm just here to see how Terry is doing," Kevin said worriedly. Although he could refine pills to help him, Terry Watford had to regain consciousness and more stable condition for the pills to have the intended effect. Hearing this, the man sighed slightly.
"The situation is quite bad. The results, as far as we know right now, are that all 4 of Mr. Watford's limbs are broken to some extent, and he also has 3 broken ribs. His spleen is completely ruptured, and there is damage to some of his other internal organs as well. He is currently undergoing surgery."
Kevin gritted his teeth and a cold light flashed across his eyes. The people from the secluded valley were too ruthless. They had almost succeeded in taking Terry Watford's life. Kevin then slowly walked over to Marcus Watford and said, "Don't worry. Your father will be fine. As long as the doctor can guarantee that he is stable enough, I can cure him." Mr. Williams, do you really mean it?" Marcus Watford stammered as he looked up at Kevin in disbelief. Ever since that day in the parking lot, he realized that he had been taught a good lesson. "With me around, I will never let your father die. I will definitely find the person responsible for this and make them pay the price." Kevin pressed hard on Marcus Watford's shoulder and added, "Don't stay in the hospital all the time. Come with me later." Terry Watford was still in critical condition. Kevin could not bear to see Marcus go through this, and he also didn't want Marcus to face this kind of danger at some point in the future. So he wanted to take Marcus on as his student. Even if he did not take Marcus as his student in a real sense, he felt that he had to look after him for Terry's sake. After all, he was going to take over the Orion Group in the future, so Kevin knew it was the right thing to do. However, Kevin's firm words were just perfunctory in the eyes of all the others. Was he really strong and mature enough to carry through with his promises? However, because of Kevin's identity, it was not appropriate for them to voice these concerns out loud. About 2 hours later, the door of the operating room was finally opened. Surrounded by a few nurses, Terry Watford was slowly pushed out. The senior management team of the Orion Group immediately rushed forward. "Doctor, how is he?" someone asked.
"You have to save him. Our company needs him to lead us,"
someone else added.
"No matter how high the cost is, it is not a problem. Bring in the top experts from anywhere in the world, as long as you can save him,"
a third person begged. The group of people all talked at the same time. Although everyone seemed to be worried about Terry Watford's condition, Kevin noticed that some of them were looking at him strangely. Or rather, they seemed to be hoping that Terry Watford would not wake up.
Please calm down, everyone. The surgery was very successful as far as we can tell right now, but the patient's condition is still very serious, and he needs some observation. He's not out of the woods yet.
After the leading doctor said that, he turned around and arranged for the nurse to wheel Terry to a room. Seeing that Terry would soon be conscious, Kevin knew that the next step to restoring him to full health was going to be in his hands, and he could not fail. Kevin reassured Marcus Watford that, as long as Terry was well enough to consume the medicinal pills he was going to refine for him, he was confident that his father would be fine. Kevin didn't say it out loud, but he had determined that he would take on Marcus as his student, since after all, he would one day take over the Orion Group. The doctors told everyone that Terry Watford was on the road to recovery, but that he was not out of the woods yet. However, Kevin couldn't help but notice that some of the Orion Group's higher-ups seemed to be hoping that Terry would not make a full recovery. Meanwhile, in his office at the hospital, William Chung took off his glasses and put them down on the table, rubbing his forehead tiredly. Many hours of a difficult, complex, and stressful operation had consumed too much of his energy. The various degrees and awards on the wall behind him fully displayed William Chung's superb medical background and skills. He was famous throughout the entire country. Otherwise, the hospital would not have ever allowed him to be the chief surgeon for someone as famous and important as Terry Watford. Suddenly, the phone on the desk next to him rang. Looking at the screen and seeing that it was his wife calling, William Chung's face suddenly turned sour. His wife's name was Cheryl. A few years ago, she was also a famous model. Her natural beauty had led her into the career even though she had higher aspirations when she was young. Their meeting was a coincidence, but when William saw Cheryl for the first time, he was immediately infatuated with her. Then he began his pursuit of her for 3 months. In the end, he did not disappoint the beautiful woman. They soon fell in love and quickly got married. But after being together for some time, William finally began to realize that Cheryl was not exactly the person he had imagined. On the contrary, Cheryl liked the city's nightlife. Even after marriage, she often did not return home until very late at night. It was very common for her to come home drunk at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, just as William was waking up to return to the hospital where his own job saved lives day in and day out. However, William did not want to say anything about this. As a famous surgeon at one of the top hospitals in the world, he often spent long hours at the hospital. Therefore, he always felt that he owed it to Cheryl to cut her some slack, since he was so rarely able to spend time with her. It was precisely because of his busy schedule that she went out so often, he assumed. But gradually, William realized that his tolerance had become a form of permission for Cheryl to do whatever she wanted. Especially in the past 1 or 2 years, Cheryl, whose modeling career was not going well recently, had actually developed the bad habit of gambling. The money that the two of them had saved up in the past had almost all been lost by her, and she even owed large gambling debts to some scary people. Her friends had all advised William Chung to divorce her. William's friends worried that his hard work was going to be ruined and his fortune taken if Cheryl continued to spend his money so freely. After all, he was still young. There was still a chance to start over, but he still could not let go of Cheryl. He loved her once and hoped he could again. He felt that she was just going through a lot at the moment. As long as she changed, their lives would definitely return to the state of bliss back when they had first met. The phone rang for more than 10 seconds before William picked it up. Before he could say anything, Cheryl's charming but impatient voice came from the other side of the phone. "What are you doing? Why did you take so long to answer the phone?" Cheryl nearly screamed at her husband.
"I just finished a surgery. I'm a little tired, so..." I wasn't paying much attention to my phone.
William answered with a slight frown. You operated on someone again? Does that mean you'll be getting another bonus? It just so happens that I lost some money tonight. Cheryl immediately said with a cheery voice that was hiding bad news. She thought that pretending her gambling wasn't a big problem, her husband might not hate her for it.
You went out gambling again? Didn't you promise me that you were going to take a break for a while?
William's tone instantly became heavier. Oh, come on, it's the last time. Besides, an old friend from a big modeling agency invited me to go, so I thought it was a good opportunity for my career. Cheryl said very impatiently. Can you give me a break for once? Before waiting for him to answer, Cheryl hung up the phone after saying that. William threw the phone back down on the desk and then slapped it hard. His chest heaved up and down violently. Just then, a man in an expensive suit walked into the room. Hello, Dr. Chung, the man said with a charming smile on his face.
Hello.
William Chung stammered as he quickly restrained his emotions.
May I ask who you are?
Let me introduce myself. My name is Jeremy O'Brien of the Orion Group. I am here to ask about Mr. Watford's condition, the man said, getting straight to the point.
Oh, I'm not sure if you were present earlier, but I explained when he came out of surgery that Mr. Watford is still in serious condition. But it appears he's going to make it. He's not completely out of the woods, though, so we just need to observe him carefully. But I'm optimistic. What did you say your name was again? William Chung said with a slight frown.
Dr. Chung, can you really say with any certainty at this point that Mr. Watford will really recover? Jeremy O'Brien asked meaningfully.
What do you mean?
William Chung stared at him, not understanding his intentions. I just want to make sure that Mr. Watford is really safe and sound, Jeremy O'Brien asked again, but this time his tone was very serious. At that same time, Jeremy took out a debit card from his pocket and put it down on the desk where William sat. In that instant, William Chung's heart sank into a deep dilemma. If he accepted the card, what would that say about his ethics as a doctor? But if he did not accept it, what would this man do to him? And besides, this card surely contained enough money to wipe the slate clean of all of Cheryl's gambling debts, right? After a long while, William Chung sighed deeply and held the card in his hand as if to caress it.
What are you suggesting?
William asked, already knowing the answer. It's a few $1 million, Jeremy O'Brien said. Hearing that, William's hand that was holding the card suddenly stopped moving. It was a few $1 million. It was enough to pay his annual salary several times over. In the next second, William Chung's face immediately revealed a slight smile.
Sir, please take a seat. Actually, Mr. Watford's situation is not as safe as I let on. I just wanted to make sure that no one panicked earlier.
As William Chung spoke, he let out a deep sigh. Meanwhile, on the other side of the hospital, Kevin checked Terry Watford's condition in the hospital room and then took Marcus Watford with him back to Swan Lake.
Mr. Williams, why did you bring this kid back with you?
Dustin Newman asked as they walked in. Dustin stared at Marcus Watford, whose eyes were red. On the way back, Kevin had already explained the pros and cons of the situation to Marcus Watford. Marcus was very grateful that Kevin was willing to give him a chance to develop his power base under him, but he really didn't know where to begin. Where are Troy and the others? Kevin looked around the room and asked.
Troy and Barry are practicing in the basement. Violet and Amanda went shopping with your parents,
Dustin Newman said as he kept an eye on Marcus Watford, whom he immediately distrusted. What about Zane? Kevin asked with some doubt.
Of course he went with your mother. Why else do you think she agreed to go out? She wanted to buy clothes for that guy,
Dustin Newman said with some envy. Kevin furrowed his eyebrows slightly when he heard this. Ever since Zane Barlow came to Swan Lake, his mother Susan seemed to have really taken him under her wing. Trying not to feel too much jealousy, Kevin brought Marcus with him up to the 4th floor. After seeing Kevin walk in, Kyle Thompson, who had just finished his training session, immediately stood up and greeted him respectfully, saying,
Sir.
Kevin only nodded slightly. and pointed at Marcus Watford. "This young man can be considered your training partner. You guys will have to get along well in the future." Although Marcus was surprised, he did not ask any questions. Marcus knew that his father's fate was in Kevin's hand at this point, and he had to do everything possible to keep Kevin happy and his father alive. Terry Watford surgeon Dr. William Chung was bribed by Jeremy O'Brien, an Orion Group executive who did not want Terry to survive. And despite his ethics, Chung took the bribe because he had a beautiful wife who had a gambling problem that had led him into debt. Kevin had taken Marcus Watford to a Swan Lake compound where Kevin would mentor him alongside his other protege, Kyle Thompson. Kevin looked from one of them to the other and then advised seriously, "From now on, you can stay here. If you need anything, feel free to tell Dustin or one of the others. But without my permission, you are not allowed to leave, and you are not allowed to bring anyone else here."
"Yes, sir, Mr. Williams,"
Marcus Watford answered respectfully. Despite having been a thorn in Kevin's side when they first met, Marcus now was going to do anything to please this man, especially since Kevin held Marcus's father Terry's life in his hands. "All right, you two can chat for a while to get to know each other. I'll go and start refining the medicinal pills for Terry now," Kevin said as he left the two of them alone in the room. Kevin had a general idea of Terry Watford's condition. His limbs had been crushed by the impact of falling from such a height. As for the broken ribs, the doctor didn't seem to be overly worried, but the damage to his organs was somewhat concerning. The reason why Terry Watford still had not woken up was because he had suffered too much strain and was mentally and physically exhausted. When he was thrown down from the 5th floor, he also suffered a concussion. Kevin analyzed Terry's various ailments and knew that he had an enormous task ahead of him. But he had to lead his friend and colleague back to health, not just because it was the right thing to do, but because a large part of Kevin's future in DC depended upon it. Taking out the secret book and looking at the numerous pill formulas, Kevin was momentarily at a loss for which one to choose. Meanwhile, in the CEO's office of the Williams Company's headquarters in Chicago, Lily stood by the window and looked at the numerous fans and reporters downstairs, who had requested that she come downstairs to give an explanation. She sighed slightly. "Did the police send any news?" Lily asked without even turning her head. Sandra Wilson looked over at her and frowned deeply before she spoke. "It is still in the preliminary stages of the investigation. There is only speculation now. Someone placed a remote-controlled device under the stage that had been wired into the speakers. It's just that there were too many fans at the scene at the time to get a clear view of who it may have been who sabotaged the concert. If they want to find the culprit from the video evidence alone, it seems as though it will be like looking for a needle in a haystack."
"What else is there to investigate? It must have been Dalton Steele who did it. Only he has the guts and the ability to pull off a stunt like this,"
Gilbert Rhodes, who was sitting on the sofa, said angrily. "Let's all try to remain calm. Even if we do have reason to believe it was Dalton Steele who did it, so what? Right now, we don't have any conclusive evidence. If we rashly make a move on him, it'll only make our situation worse," Adriana Wright said, still able to maintain her sense of calm. She had not been overcome with anger like some of the others.
"Then we can only sit back and hope that Emo recovers in the hospital? If we can't come up with some conclusive evidence, then we'll just have to let Dalton get away with it?"
Gilbert Rhodes said unwillingly. "No one is saying that. No matter how perfect the cover is, there will definitely be some clues." Adriana patted Gilbert's shoulder and comforted him, adding, "By the way, where is Andre Hernandez? Wasn't he in charge of the whole event? We can't find him. No one has been able to get in touch with him since the incident. We sent someone to his house and found that Andre had left 2 days ago. His phone is also switched off." Sandra Wilson immediately replied. She looked around the room before adding, "Through the USB drive that Emo received shortly before the incident, the only thing that we can confirm now is that Andre Hernandez was actually working alongside Dalton and Ethan Williams." Hearing that, Gilbert immediately struggled out of Adriana's embrace, took out his phone, and started calling someone. "Spread the word, no matter what. I want Andre Hernandez found. Break his legs for me and then bring him to see me. The reward is $100,000, he said firmly into the phone. After saying this, Gilbert threw his phone off to the side. Adriana Wright only slightly frowned at his actions and did not say anything. At that moment, Rachel hurried into the office and said with an ugly expression, "I just got some bad news. Someone found Andre Hernandez's body in a ditch out in the suburbs." "What?" Adriana Wright stood up from the sofa in surprise. "Dalton must have done it. He didn't want us to find Andre and get any information out of him, so he made the first move and killed the person who made him most vulnerable." Gilbert clenched his fists and said while gnashing his teeth, "If that's the case, any evidence Andre Hernandez could have provided is now off the table," Sandra said as she frowned with great concern. "There is another way. Try to find the person who killed Andre Hernandez and use him to dig out Dalton Steele." Adriana Wright reacted pretty quickly and immediately thought of a way out. At the same time, in the mansion of the Steele family, Ethan Williams walked into the study in a hurry. "What are you trying to do? Did you send someone to kill Andre Hernandez? Now we will have one less powerful chess piece inside the Williams Company." Ethan reprimanded in a stern voice.
"Are you really stupid, or are we just pretending to be stupid? Such a big incident happened during the event. Do you really think that the people of Williams Company wouldn't think that there was something up with Andre Hernandez?"
Dalton Steele closed the book in his hand, raised his head, and stared coldly at Ethan.
"Once he was found out, do you think he would have hesitated to reveal us? For the sake of our safety, I don't think Andre had any chance to go on living."
"I assumed you knew that," Dalton added.
"Well, you should have discussed this with me before you made a move, or at least just let me know. Don't forget that he's my contact after all." Ethan's eyes were about to narrow into a slit, and his chest heaved up and down violently.
Whether you say it or not, you already know the truth. Then why should I waste my energy?"
Dalton said with a puzzled expression. Ethan almost fainted from trying to keep his temper under control. If it wasn't for the fact that he wasn't any match for someone like Dalton Steele, Ethan might have lost his temper and done something he regretted.
"I advise you to calm down. Anyway, Andre Hernandez is already dead. Besides, it's not like you don't have anyone else to use inside the Williams Company. He was just a chess piece, a pawn. If you lose one pawn, it doesn't mean the game is over."
Dalton Steele placed the book on the table, got up, and tidied his clothes.
"I advise you not to act rashly now. And now I need to go out and meet a friend," he added.
After saying this, Dalton left with a smile. The moment he passed by Ethan, Dalton's face instantly darkened, and his eyes flashed with a look of intense rage. Ethan was playing right into his hands. Looking at Dalton Steele's back, Ethan was really angry. He kicked the leg of the table, and the impact of his foot against the wood made him jump up and down on the spot because of the pain. The person Dalton was meeting for lunch was none other than Brett Stewart. In the time since they had last met, the two of them had not spoken again. Whether Brett knew the truth or not, this time he had affected the people of the Williams Company. No matter how bad it had gotten, he had to give him an explanation. Dalton's association with Brett Stewart and the Myriads was a secret to all around them, and was complicated by the long association the Myriads had with the Alliance, as all fought to keep the Pinnacle from returning to rule the Foundation. If Kevin knew of the schemes being acted out behind his back, he would have been consumed with rage, and surely those schemes would soon come to light. The lip-syncing scandal had Lily and her Williams media executives in defense mode, but matters worsened when they learned that Andre Hernandez hadn't just disappeared, but that he'd been murdered. Clearly, Andre was involved in the scheme that stemmed, they were sure, from Dalton Steele. Dalton continued to dismiss Ethan's plans as he went to meet Brett Stewart, who was going to be, it appeared, a new partner in his effort to control Chicago. Dalton had been aware that the Myriads were hiding in the Midwest. He found it unbelievable. If the Myriads really entered the world of ordinary people, it would certainly make things more complicated. He had tried to find information about where exactly they were now, but apart from Brett Stewart's villa in the western suburbs of Chicago, he couldn't find any useful information. No matter what methods he used, the people he sent out either returned empty-handed or didn't return from their mission. Dalton couldn't do anything about it. Although he was Travis Adams' direct protege, he didn't have any substantial position in the Myriads. Some people who firmly supported Brett Stewart's faction even thought of him as something of a thorn in their side. As for those who opposed Brett Stewart, although they had some dealings with him in secret, Dalton naturally didn't pay much attention to them. After all, the Myriads were a huge organization. He didn't have enough capacity to take on that kind of challenge. More importantly, Brett Stewart was like a brother to him. How could he betray his own brother? Soon, Dalton arrived at the villa. Due to the orders Brett Stewart had laid out for his people ahead of time, he didn't encounter any obstacles along the way. At the moment, Brett was sitting in the study with Roger Knott. There was also a chessboard placed between the two of them. The black and white pieces were intertwined with each other. It almost appeared as though the white chess pieces that were deep into the black piece's side were trying to expand their influence over an enemy's territory. Looking at the complicated chessboard, Roger Knott's right hand was holding a rook, repeatedly stretched out and pulled back several times. Finally, he shook his head lightly a few times and said with a slight sigh, "Your chess skills have improved. I feel as though you've already won." "Haha, my friend, you must be joking. You're just playing absent-mindedly today. It is reasonable for you to lose once in a while," Brett Stewart casually said as he leaned back. Roger was stunned for a moment, then he revealed a bitter smile. There was indeed something on his mind today. As one of the higher-ups of the Myriads, he was not optimistic about the current situation. Outsiders might not feel much, but in recent days, all of the members of the Myriads had been worrying about their own safety. The situation on the ancient battlefield had hurt their vitality. Even if Brett Stewart reacted in time and kept most of the elites, the Alliance was still closing in on them step by step. It seemed like they wanted to eliminate all of them. Under such circumstances, it was hard for Roger to see how the situation would develop favorably for them in the future. "Sir, I'm a little nervous. May I ask how plans for the next steps are going?" Roger had taken a deep breath before revealing his thoughts. He had respect for Brett Stewart's leadership, but Roger also knew that things were not going well for the Myriads in the ongoing attempt to push back the Pinnacle. "Roger, I figured that you were thinking about this problem." Brett played with the thumb ring on his hand and said with a smile. An awkward expression flashed across Roger's face. He was old and wise, but Brett Stewart had easily seen through his thoughts. "Since you have already asked today, I will ask you a question in return. How is the situation between the Myriads and the Alliance?" Brett asked with a slight smile on his face. After thinking for a moment, he added, "There is no need to worry. You can tell me anything. No matter what you say, I will not blame you." Hearing this, Roger frowned slightly and fell into a short silence. Brett did not rush him. He picked up the coffee cup next to him and took a sip, waiting patiently for Roger to give an answer. After a few minutes, Roger hesitated and said, "To be honest, sir, if you really want to compare us with the Alliance, I don't think we have any chance if it really comes to that. The difference in strength between the two of us is too big." Roger Knott wasn't belittling himself, Brett, or the Myriads as a whole by any means. After all, the current strength of the Alliance was as strong as the sun at noon. No one would dare to fight them head-on. "If that's the case, why did you ask me this question right now?" Brett said with a faint smile as he put down his coffee cup. He added,
Right now, the strength of the Alliance is already an indisputable fact. There is only one option for us, and that is to accumulate as much strength as possible." He paused for a moment before adding, "In addition, I have a feeling that Washington might make some big moves." "Sir, what do you mean by that?" Roger asked in surprise. "Didn't you receive the news?" Brett asked as he gave Roger a deep look. "Recently, the so-called outstanding geniuses of the younger generation have all begun to mysteriously disappear. There's also no news about Jeffrey Bowie. Out of curiosity, I sent someone to investigate. Guess what news I got?" "What?" Roger asked him almost subconsciously. "More than half of the people at the Southeast School for Natural Medicine have disappeared. Or it should be said that the school itself is divided into two factions, and the ones who have disappeared are the people from Jeffrey Bowie's faction," Brett Stewart said while stroking the ring on his hand. "Do you mean that there was an internal conflict in the Southeast School for Natural Medicine?" Roger asked. He was a smart person, and he instantly understood the importance of this news. "So I was wondering what kind of external force was able to cause such a huge storm in the school, and why and how the news was so tightly concealed," Brett said as his eyes revealed a thoughtful expression. "There are many powers who could seize the opportunity to eliminate Jeffrey Bowie and the others. Who do you suspect did it?" Roger asked. His brows were almost knitted into a frown. "You're right. There are many powers that can do this. But what about the follow-up problems? No matter what, the Southeast School for Natural Medicine was still a powerful organization. Even if the government didn't want to ask about it, it wouldn't be able to. But why did they have to remain silent? Don't forget that the matter of the Pinnacle has yet to be truly resolved. If war breaks out in the future, the government still needs to have enough strength to counterattack." Brett Stewart analyzed patiently. Roger gradually became silent, or rather, he did not know how to refute. Brett sighed faintly. "I also hope that I'm just overthinking things. After all, ordinary people cannot interfere with matters of the experts' world. This is an unwritten rule that has been established for generations, but I have a feeling that a storm is coming." "Sir, if what you have said is true, what should we do now?" Roger asked in confusion. After all, they were discussing a threat to the entire Foundation. It wasn't something that could be easily solved by anyone, let alone the two of them. If such a thing really happened, the Myriads would need Brett Stewart to command them to survive. "There is only one thing we need to do right now, and that is to completely rest and recuperate." Brett Stewart slowly exhaled a long breath of air and said. Just as Roger Knott was about to say something, a subordinate of the Myriad suddenly knocked on the door. "Supreme Commander, Mr. Knott, Dalton Steele is here to see you." "Dalton is here? Where is he? Bring him to me right away." A smile instantly appeared on Brett Stewart's face. He exchanged glances with Roger Knott and left the study. At the same time, at the mansion on Swan Lake, Kevin, who had been preparing to refine some healing pills for Terry Watford, suddenly received a call from Stanley Cooper, asking him to come over to the Reaper Squad's base immediately, saying that there was an urgent matter to discuss. What matter is so important that it can't be discussed over the phone? Do I really need to come over there now? Kevin raised his eyebrows and asked in surprise.
"I can't explain it clearly on the phone. In short, someone wants to see you,"
Stanley Cooper said seriously. "Who is it?" Kevin quickly asked. "Don't tell me it's government officials. You know what I hate most is flattery from those people."
"Don't worry. I would never arrange that kind of thing for you. To be precise, it is not one person, but 3 people who want to see you right now."
Stanley Cooper sat down in a chair and crossed his legs. Kevin frowned. Finally, Stanley Cooper gave in. He quickly stood up from his chair and said,
"It's Sebastian Young, Clarissa Pratt, and Jeffrey Bowie who want to see you."
"All 3 of them? What do they want to talk about?" Kevin frowned and muttered. Stanley Cooper did not answer. He just spread his hands and shrugged with a sigh, indicating that he didn't know either. "What is going on?" Kevin asked in a serious tone. It was rare for Kevin not to know exactly what lay in his future when he was dealing with those of lesser powers than he had. But Stanley Cooper had laid out a mystery for him that he couldn't immediately solve. But he knew he had to. As Kevin was preparing to refine some medicinal pills to help Terry Watford recover, he received a call from Stanley Cooper asking him to come to the Reaper Squad's base right away. When Kevin asked why, Stanley would only reveal that there were 3 people who wanted to speak with him. When Kevin demanded to know who it was, Stanley finally revealed that it was Sebastian Young, Clarissa Pratt, and Jeffrey Bowie, much to Kevin's surprise. After all, he didn't have much of a relationship with Jeffrey, Clarissa, Sebastian, and the others. In fact, he had something of a bad impression of them because of all the conflicts between them in the past. Although he had rescued the 3 of them from the Mavericks' experiments, Kevin did not believe that they would be grateful to him just because of this. After all, he hadn't gone there specifically to try to save them. They just so happened to be there.
The Mavericks who were captured had been very tight-lipped. Then yesterday they all died for no apparent reason.
Stanley Cooper sighed helplessly and said,
"Now the only ones left in our hands are Sebastian Young and the other 2. It was not easy to get them to step forward and point out the Mavericks, but they finally made a compromise. Their only condition is to see you."
Wait a minute. The people from the Mavericks that they arrested are all dead? Kevin frowned and looked at Stanley Cooper with narrowed eyes. He hesitated for more than 10 seconds before he finally said, "It seems that the Reaper Squad is not as strong as I thought. It has been infiltrated by the Mavericks."
Well, either way, it can be said that Sebastian Young and the other 2 are our last chance,
Stanley Cooper said as he rubbed his forehead. He did not have any reason to refute Kevin's words. After all, the Reaper Squad's base was heavily guarded and a group of prisoners had died. This could only prove that there was a problem on the inside. But I still don't understand. Why are they asking to see me? There shouldn't be many people who know my identity inside the Reaper Squad, right? Kevin asked puzzledly.
You're right, but you were carrying out a mission with me to destroy the research lab of the Mavericks. Even the most foolish person alive would be able to grasp the relationship between you and the Reaper Squad,
Stanley Cooper explained to Kevin. He then added,
"Anyway, you're already here. It's not like you have anything better to lose by meeting them. Just treat it as a favor to me. It will make me look better in the eyes of some around here anyway."
Were you also punished? The surprised look on Kevin's face became even more serious. One should know that Stanley Cooper was a member of the inner circle of the Reaper Squad, and he was Scott Whitney's own grandson.
Didn't I tell you that everyone involved in this matter was punished? I definitely can't be selfish and try to get out of it,
Stanley said flatly. After thinking seriously for a while, Kevin gently nodded his head and agreed to go through with it. Stanley smiled and asked Kevin to wait for a while. He would go and bring Sebastian, Clarissa, and Jeffrey to him. About 10 minutes later, Sebastian Young, Clarissa Pratt, and Jeffrey Bowie arrived under the escort of more than 20 Reaper Squad warriors. Kevin's eyes flashed with surprise when he saw such a scene. Within the Reaper Squad's base, there were strict security measures everywhere. From this, it could be seen that the inside of the Reaper Squad was in a tense situation where everyone was essentially a soldier.
All right, all of you wait outside. If there's anything else I need from you, I'll call you in.
Stanley Cooper ordered his subordinates to leave first, then personally closed the door behind them. He leaned against the door and crossed his arms in front of his chest. "You're not going to leave too?" Kevin asked with a frown.
Please forgive me, but if I do, there might be people who will say that you are colluding with each other. Don't worry, you can just pretend that I'm not here. I don't have eyes or ears,
Stanley Cooper said, closing his eyes and putting his hands over his ears as he spoke. "If you don't mind, I really have nothing to say." Kevin turned around and looked at the 3 of them. "As long as you don't mind, we have no objections," Sebastian Young replied weakly. Looking at the three of them who clearly had yet to fully recover, Kevin couldn't help but feel his heart sink a little. Once upon a time, these three people were called geniuses and were quite good looking. At that time, they were insufferably arrogant and proud of themselves. It could be said that they were young and successful and on the path to doing great things. When he first met them, Kevin was as lowly as one could be. But now it was the complete opposite. Kevin was getting stronger and stronger, and he was well on his way to building his own empire. But these three were like leftovers in an old dirty pot now. Tell me, what is it that you want from me? I feel that there is no sense of so-called friendship between us. Furthermore, I really don't think that I can help you much. Kevin didn't hide anything and got straight to the point. The three of them looked at each other and saw the deep sadness and helplessness in each other's eyes. The room gradually fell into silence. Sebastian Young and the other two did not seem to know what to say. Stanley Cooper, who was still standing at the door, seemed to be meditating like an old monk and didn't show any reaction. Are you going to tell me what you asked me for here or not? I still have a lot of things waiting for me on the outside. I don't have time to waste with you guys, Kevin said impatiently. Sebastian Young took a deep breath and looked at Kevin. He said seriously, Mr. Williams, I wanted to see you today because I have a request. Oh, you actually called me Mr. Williams? How times have changed. It seems that there is something very important that you have entrusted to me, but why do you believe that I will do anything to help you? The corner of Kevin's mouth lifted slightly as he asked. Because in our memories, the only one who dared to interfere and ask about this matter is you. In addition, you also have sufficient strength at this point, he started to say before trailing off. Also, you have already destroyed the Maverick Slab, and you have already become enemies with them. Clarissa Pratt chimed in as she spoke faintly. So is this because I saved you guys? Kevin's face showed some surprise. He didn't give the three of them a chance to speak. He continued. I can also tell you honestly that saving your lives was just an accident. Even if it was someone else who was locked up in that room, I still would have saved them. It's not as if I came there looking for you. Jeffrey Bowie suddenly said loudly, But what we are trying to talk about is related to the safety of the entire Foundation, as well as the safety of every single expert alive. It is not an exaggeration to say that it concerns the survival of humanity itself. What does it have to do with me? Kevin asked as he crossed his arms in front of his chest. Although Kevin was a little surprised, his facial expression didn't change in the least. He saw no reason to give away any of his thoughts to these three. Kevin, what we are saying is not a joke. As a citizen and member of society, you absolutely can't refuse, Jeffrey Bowie said with excitement. Are you talking about the Pinnacle? It's not like it's a big deal. They're not a threat anymore. Kevin leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms in front of his chest as if he didn't care about anything. However, Stanley Cooper, who was standing beside them, suddenly opened his eyes wide. He looked at them with a flash of light in his eyes. He seemed to be thinking about something important. Kevin, in my memory, you are not such a cold-hearted person, Sebastian Young said as he stretched out his hand and held back Jeffrey Bowie, who had become extremely angry at Kevin. Not to mention that this was not the place to start a fight. Just the gap between them and Kevin was too great. Even if the three of them were at their peak condition, they were still no match for someone like Kevin. Instead of making a move and humiliating themselves, they might as well sit down and have a measured conversation. It wasn't the time for them to deny Kevin's words. Everyone will change, Kevin said slowly. In this complicated society, how many people can remain the same throughout their entire lives? Sebastian Young and the other two became silent as they pondered the meaning behind Kevin's words. Jeffrey Bowie angrily turned his head to the side and sulked. Clarissa Pratt also slightly lowered her head. She did not know what to think. Sebastian Young frowned and looked at Kevin. He wanted to see something from his eyes, but he did not see anything that he could grab hold of. After a long time, Kevin looked at the three of them who were just staring at each other. He suddenly could not help but laugh. He sighed and said, "That's enough. If you have anything else to say, just say it. I promise that I will listen before deciding whether to help or not."
Do you want to help or not? Anyway, this matter does not only involve us,
Jeffrey Bowie said with annoyance. He didn't even look at Kevin. His remaining anger had yet to dissipate as he spoke. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. I just won't listen to you." Kevin couldn't bear to see Jeffrey Bowie doing this. He forcefully slapped the table, stood up, and made a move to leave.
All right, put your temper away. We are talking about serious business here. The least you can do is keep your temper in check,
Sebastian Young said bravely. Obviously, he had seen through exactly what Kevin was thinking. He added,
I understand that you are of great importance.
"What exactly is it that you want to tell me?" Kevin frowned slightly and his face finally became completely serious.
When we were being held captive by the Mavericks, we accidentally overheard them saying that their superiors had joined forces with the Pinnacle,
Sebastian Young said in a somewhat shocking tone. Kevin and Stanley Cooper stood up almost at the same time as they shouted in disbelief.
"What?"
As Kevin was summoned to the Reaper Squad's base by Stanley Cooper, he was somewhat surprised to learn that the ones who had requested his presence were Sebastian Young, Clarissa Pratt, and Jeffrey Bowie. He thought they perhaps wanted to thank him for rescuing them from the Mavericks research lab, but Kevin matter-of-factly informed them that he had not had any intention of going there to save them. But when Sebastian Young informed him that they had overheard that the Mavericks had joined forces with the Pinnacle, Kevin and Stanley both reacted with shock. Kevin and Stanley couldn't believe what Sebastian had said. Given the status of the leading members of the Mavericks, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that the words of their leaders could decide the fate of many people. So when Sebastian Young said that they had joined forces with the Pinnacle, it was truly hard to fathom.
"Do you know what you are talking about? If there is no conclusive evidence, that sentence you uttered just now is enough to be truly dangerous, and you will never be able to make a comeback if it gets out and turns out to be false."
Stanley Cooper couldn't help but reprimand him harshly.
"Don't worry. I am very clear on the implications right now, and I know what I am talking about. This is absolutely true,"
Sebastian said as he turned around and looked at Stanley Cooper calmly.
"You are part of the Reaper Squad. Haven't you investigated the Mavericks? Their experiments on experts are not the sort of thing that should be taking place anywhere among the Foundation."
"Sebastian, you'd better think long and hard about this," Stanley said.
His chest heaved up and down as he spoke. If you don't believe us, then it only means that your status in the Reaper Squad is not high enough. Or rather, you just know too little about the Mavericks," Clarissa Pratt added quietly as she took over the conversation. "Then how did you guys hear it? How exactly did it happen?" Kevin frowned slightly. He also did not dare to believe this news. Thinking back to the huge invasion of the Pinnacle, whether it was the experts or the ordinary combat units of the military, everyone was pushed to the limit. As the party in charge at the time, the Mavericks represented the hundreds of millions of civilians. If they were to join forces with the Pinnacle, wouldn't that mean that the government had already surrendered? Kevin really couldn't figure out why they would do such a thing.
"Although we only heard about it, we do have conclusive evidence,"
Sebastian Young said as he slowly stretched out his right hand, lifted up his sleeve, and revealed his arm. Under the light, Sebastian's arm was completely different from any ordinary person's arm. His arm emitted a light blue fluorescence, and it could be seen with the naked eye under the surface of his skin. The crisscrossing blood vessels drew out a complicated mark on his arm. "What does this mean?" Kevin asked with a slight frown.
"It doesn't necessarily look that different right now."
Sebastian stretched out his left hand as he spoke. He used his index and middle fingers to gently stroke his wrist. On the surface, it looked strange, but it did not seem to be anything all that special. However, after he cut his wrist, there was no blood flowing out. Instead, it was a kind of blue liquid. Seeing this, Kevin frowned even more tightly. He looked hard at the place where Sebastian was cut and seemed to be deep in thought. Usually, when the blood in a human starts to change color, it can only be explained by two possibilities. Either there was an impairment in one's immune system and blood supply function, causing the person to become extremely ill, or the person was poisoned, destroying the very structure of the blood and causing it to change color. However, Sebastian clearly did not belong to either of these two categories. This led Kevin to be left in utter confusion, unable to figure out what exactly had happened to him. Immediately following that, the others mimicked Sebastian's actions, and the same strange liquid flowed out from their wrists as well. Now you believe it, right? Or do you think this is the color blood that humans should have? Sebastian said without changing his expression, as he was already used to the bizarre color of his blood.
This only means that you have gone through severe torture. It is hard to say that the Mavericks have joined the Pinnacle just based on this.
Stanley took a deep breath and tried his best to regain his composure as he spoke. If you say so, I have nothing to say to refute you. You can treat what the three of us say as nothing to be concerned about, but if the Pinnacle invades in the future, don't blame us for not warning you ahead of time, Sebastian said as he wiped the liquid off his wrist. Miraculously, in less than a minute, his wound had completely healed. Such a powerful self-healing ability was something that not even the most powerful expert in the world had. Without any unnecessary communication, Sebastian and the other two took a deep look at Kevin, who was himself deep in thought. Then Sebastian and the others steeled their hearts and left the Reaper Squad. Stanley returned to his office and closed the door. He sat opposite Kevin with a solemn expression on his face.
So what do you think about this matter?
After thinking for more than 10 seconds, Kevin took a deep breath and said without looking up, Do you want to hear the truth, or do you want me to lie to you?
What are you talking about? Of course I want to hear the truth.
Stanley Cooper was not in the mood to joke around with Kevin, so he replied seriously. Actually, in my heart, I do believe what the three of them said just now. Kevin's face was expressionless, and he didn't give Stanley Cooper any chance to speak. He then analyzed it vaguely, saying, You can think about it yourself. If the Mavericks want to do something, and if there is no harm to them in doing it, why wouldn't they? He then added, It has been a long time since the invasion of the Pinnacle. Why didn't they make any further moves? They were never going to let this matter rest so easily forever. Listening to Kevin's thoughts, Stanley Cooper gradually fell into silence. It wasn't that he didn't want to refute Kevin's words, but that he really couldn't find a suitable excuse and reason to do so. After a long time, Stanley raised his head slightly and only said one sentence.
I think you're right.
I hope I'm not, but the Mavericks aren't fools. They never would have made it so that everyone in the inner circle knew about it. They would never let it get that far. So what Sebastian Young and the others heard might not have been true. Kevin said without stopping, But there is another problem with this. In the lab of the Mavericks, there should not be any groundless rumors. Since Sebastian heard it, why did those people let them hear it? It could have been a diversion for their sake. As Kevin's words became more and more contradictory, Stanley Cooper's frown became tighter and tighter. Meanwhile, in the mountains at the headquarters of the Alliance, the building was engulfed in flames. Many members of the Alliance were running back and forth in a state of panic trying to put out the fire. However, the fire was only getting fiercer and fiercer, causing these experts who had no experience in putting out a fire to be thrown into complete chaos. Alliance leader, don't go any further. The fire is getting bigger and bigger. If you go any further, you might be in danger of getting trapped, an Alliance member said as he wiped the stains on his face and anxiously pulled on the sleeve of the Alliance leader.
Get out of my way. My wife hasn't come out yet. Are you telling me to retreat right now without her?
The Alliance leader roared in anger.
Have you found out the reason for the fire yet?
Ever since the defeat of the Myriads, the Alliance leader had been in a very good mood. He even gave the members who stayed in the headquarters a vacation. Today, he was drinking wine and enjoying the scenery with a few of the higher-ups of the Alliance. However, he did not expect that just as he picked up the wine, a servant would run over to report that the section of the headquarters where his wife was had caught fire. The Alliance leader was so scared that he threw aside his wine glass and ran over in a hurry. However, when he arrived, the fire had already covered the entire wing of the building. "We haven't found out yet, but we have some conjectures. But the most important thing right now is that the fire is too big. We need everyone to get to safety." The man braced himself and replied. At that moment, the man's heart was also filled with countless worries. He never expected this kind of thing to happen. The buildings of the headquarters of the Alliance were luxurious, but they were all very old and were not built to withstand a fire like this. After all, the headquarters was located in the mountains, so wood was the easiest material to use. Given the drought that this area had been in once the fire started, it could be seen with the naked eye that the fire was spreading at a terrifying speed. From the time the fire was discovered until now, in just less than 10 minutes, it had already spread to 5 different buildings.
How has she not been rescued yet? What are you still standing there for anyway?
The Alliance leader kicked his subordinate in the leg, causing him to take a few steps back and almost fall to the ground. Ignoring the warnings, the Alliance leader turned around and took a few more steps forward. He stopped at the edge of the safe zone of the fire and looked at the flames anxiously, but he couldn't see any movement through the flames.
Hurry up and put out the fire. If anything happens to her, none of you will be alive tomorrow.
The Alliance leader pointed at the fire and roared. He had been focused on developing his power base recently that he hadn't spent much time with his wife. However, this did not mean that he did not love Selena in the depths of his heart. In many cases, that love was not expressed in words, but there was never any doubt that he cared for her as much as anyone possibly could. Following the orders of the Alliance leader, the members of the Alliance could not help but increase the speed of their movements. Time passed minute by minute, and soon almost an hour had passed. The fire was finally put out completely. The suffocating smoke stimulated everyone's nerves. Most of the people present had their faces covered in soot. Some of the clothes on their bodies had even been burnt by the fire. None of them had their previous high and mighty appearance, and they were now all like a group of beggars gathered together in charred rags. However, no one dared to leave without permission. They stood quietly on the spot and looked at the Alliance leader, whose face was ashen. Looking at the ruins in front of them, the Alliance leader felt like he was choking. If it wasn't for someone helping him steady himself in time, he might have fallen to the ground.
Is there still no trace of her?
The Alliance leader asked in a trembling voice. Alliance leader, please accept our condolences. The man beside him lowered his head and answered weakly. In fact, half an hour ago, everyone already had an answer to this question in their hearts. The fire was so huge, and she had not come out of the building. Even when parts of it collapsed, she still had yet to show herself. The probability of surviving was very low. It seemed all but a certainty that they weren't going to be pulling her out alive. Now that the body had not been found, it only seemed to suggest that she had been burned beyond recognition. The Alliance leader suddenly let out a muffled groan. Then he used all of his strength to hold his chest tightly. He spat out a mouthful of blood and his eyes closed as he fainted. Alliance leader! Many people cried out in unison. The surrounding Alliance members immediately rushed to him, wanting to check on the Alliance leader's condition.
Why the hell are you all surrounding him? Hurry up and call the medical staff over.
The Alliance's highest-ranking member present shouted, trying not to panic. At the same time, at the foot of the mountain of the Alliance, where the trees were very dense, more than a dozen people were moving at a fast speed. If the people gathered around the Alliance leader were there at the moment, they would definitely recognize the one who was being supported by 2 women was Selena Salem, who it was widely believed should have died in the fire. At that moment, Selena's face was mixed with panic, worry, and a strange sense of excitement. She kept muttering, "Faster, faster. Don't let him have enough time to come across any kind of clue." We have to put enough space between us that he won't be able to catch up." When the others heard her pleas, they all increased their speed as much as they could as they shuttled through the dense forest into a long-planned escape from the Alliance Mountain hideaway.